This is House Planning Help, episode 87. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're looking to construct a new house or remodel an existing property. I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to create an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. Coming up in this session, my guest is Andrew Peel from Peel Passive House Consulting. We're talking about quality assurance. What does it mean in relation to a house build or retrofits? Thank you for downloading. Welcome along. Really appreciate your support and getting loads of emails and tweets and everything at the moment. It's all good. So thank you for that. And I thought it'd be nice today. You might have noticed this theme in the last few podcasts. I keep talking about land, but that's only because I'm trying to get hold of land myself. I do want to do a podcast on setting budgets because I don't know whether I've set a good budget, but I want to take you through the thought process that's in my mind that makes total sense. For example, the house I'm in at the moment, which is pretty good in terms of space, is the only thing we're missing. We're right in the middle of the town. It's an awesome location. I'd love to stay here, but trying to source that plot nearby is really, really tricky. So I've realised that probably we will have to move out of the town. Even then, is going to be difficult. So say, for example, my current house is worth £300,000. In my mind, if my budget for the whole project is £500,000, including build and land, that's doable. That should be somewhere. No. Because this week I put in my first bid on a property. And my bid was £400,000 for the land. It's just because we thought, this is it. But that would have been crazy. I would have really been stretching myself in the early stage. So perhaps it's a blessing that we didn't get that in the end. It was a bungalow. It was south facing. It had a beautiful garden as well. We chatted to the neighbours. It just seemed like it was right. It felt right. That was the most encouraging thing. That I've never had that feeling looking at any other plot at all. I thought I could have lived here, but it just wasn't to be. So I guess that's the other thing, that you've got so much competition. If you are close to a town or city, people were going over the asking price. It's a severe lack of land. If I think of all the developer houses, don't get me started on the developer houses again. We're heading to Toronto, Canada for our interview today. Andrew Peel from Peel Passive House Consulting is my guest as we get to grips with quality assurance. We know it's at the heart of the Passive House certification process, but what does it mean? How does it work? And how do we apply it? I started by asking Andrew to tell me a little bit about his background.
Yeah, so I'm a low-energy building consultant. I got originally involved in the Passive House movement, if you will, at the source. So that was at the Passive House Institute in Germany. Was actually doing a master's thesis in renewable energy at the time, and decided for philosophical reasons I wanted to veer more into energy efficiency. I felt that it made more sense, was easier, more effective to actually reduce our energy consumption than worry as much about how do we change the way we produce energy. And I hadn't actually heard of the Passive House at the time, but just through my searching, came across the Institute and applied for a thesis position there and ended up getting accepted. And so I ended up completing my master's thesis and working at the Institute for some time. After that, I ended up getting a job in England at the building research establishment. Through just an odd happenstance, the BRE was actually, they had organized a study tour to Germany to show passive houses to some British delegates. And I was doing some translation for that tour and ended up meeting my future employer there. So it was a bit ironic that because I knew German, I got a job in England. Not many people can say that.
And then how did you get back to Canada?
That was just for personal reasons, decided I wanted to move back to my home country, and sort of just took a break from work for a while, and then slowly just opportunities came up. I didn't really have an intention of starting my own business, but just getting in contact through colleagues in Canada, realizing that actually passive houses started to grow in the country and that there could be some opportunity to provide services. And so just slowly the last 2-3 years been developing offerings for North America and seeing that there is interest. So now I'm involved with passive certification, consultancy, and also provide training as well.
It's quite interesting that you've got that European background, and today we're going to be talking about quality assurance. However, perhaps before we do that, you could explain a little bit about something that every so often comes up, and that's this digression between one of the groups in America. I think I'm right in saying it's the Passive House Institute US. What happened when this broke away from the one in Europe?
So, I never really delved deep into, the fine detail of it. I think in the end, partly a clash of personalities. But essentially, the Passive House Institute US, originally were full supporters of the standard, and they were working hard to apply the standard in North America, and really try to get homeowners and builders and other professionals to take up the standard. I guess they were certainly struggling, and I guess they've come to the conclusion that Passive House, as it's currently defined by the Institute in Germany, isn't appropriate across the continent, and so.
But it's just physics, so why?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the Passive House standard at the heart is based on building physics. I suppose they were, at least in their experience, finding that it wasn't necessarily cost effective. We do have different economic conditions in North America with much lower energy prices, different building practices, building culture. And so I guess they were struggling to really apply the standard. And they decided, well, we don't think it's appropriate for North America, at least in general, and the Institute in Germany disagreed with them on that, and the Institute in the US decided to branch out on their own, and so they've effectively severed ties with the German Institute. Now, more recently, they've proposed and put a draft report out on climate-specific standard for Passive House. And so it's unfortunately, in the last few years, it's created a lot of confusion. It's really a detriment to everyone involved because people aren't sure necessarily what standard they think they should follow. And it's just, there's a lot of good people. Ultimately, 95+% of the people involved in the industry just want to build really good high performance buildings. And this is probably acting as a bit of a barrier, one of many, to that.
I know that you're in Canada, but why did you feel that you just wanted to embrace what you'd learned at the Passive House Institute and practice that in Canada?
I through my experience and application of the standard, found that it was a very viable standard founded on solid building physics and research. And that's one thing that the Institute in Germany is really partly they're maybe a bit conservative because yes, we have the data, the monitoring, the research to back up what we're putting out into the market. And I feel the U.S. Institute doesn't necessarily have the same pedigree from that respect.
If you're a homeowner living in the US at the moment, what does that mean for you? If you're coming in thinking, I might want a passive house, what do you do? Who are the people that you turn to?
Well, there are organizations in North America that are actively supporting the international standard, so the standard defined by the Institute in Germany. So the likes of New York Passive House, for instance, they're very much proponents of the international standard. And I think because of more recent activities with FIAS, so the Institute in the US, defining their own standard, I think this is starting to alienate them a bit more from some Passive House practitioners and supporters.
It's a shame they didn't change the name.
I mean, to me, ultimately, at the end of the day, if it's fine. Any organization can come up with their own standard and promote it and train people, certify to their standard. That's fine. It's just, I agree, keeping that name is what's really caused the confusion. I think they're, in a way, piggybacking a bit off the Institute without really wanting to cooperate with them.
Let's talk about quality assurance then, and perhaps first we can define what do we mean by that?
It's a process to ensure ultimately that what you have constructed and people are moving into, occupants, be it of a residential or non-residential building that they are occupying, is actually what was intended in the design.
And how is that achieved?
Through a fairly rigorous process, and certainly the people going through the process the first time don't appreciate necessarily the rigor that is applied in the process, but it's really validating all of their calculations, their assumptions, any of the data they collect on equipment, and how they've actually done the assessment.
Can you give us some examples there? Because you've alluded to it, but what is the extra work they would be doing?
Okay, so common issue I come across in North America is the performance of windows and how they're actually rated. In North America, we have a different system, National Fenestration Rating Council. And so they have a couple methods of assessing windows, one being an actual hotbox test and another being, so that's a physical test, and then another one being a simulation. And the way they simulate the performance of windows differs somewhat from the European standard. It's certainly possible to take the base model for Windows and modify it to meet the European standards. But then ultimately how they represent those results are simplified, and you can't just use them directly in Passivhaus assessments. So there's a bunch of work to be done there to ensure that the figures that are being used are appropriate in the Passivhaus software.
Is this ultimately a process that's going to finish up with a test? And if so, what is that test?
There are certain post-construction tests or verifications that are required as part of the quality assurance process and ultimately to be eligible for certification. One of them is an air pressure test, or better known as a blower door test, which tests the air tightness of the building, so how leaky it is. There's also ventilation commissioning requirements. So that is ensuring that the ventilation system is operating as designed, that the required amount of air is being supplied or extracted from the appropriate rooms. These two tests are really good indicators of the quality of the construction and the installation of the systems. There isn't, a live physical visit required as part of the quality assurance process, because just through the other documentation that is required to be submitted, and also the air tightness testing, if it does achieve the results, it's a very good indicator that a lot of care has been taken in the construction of the building.
We recently completed our documentary on air tightness, so we're always happy to hammer that point home. You mentioned documents. I don't know that I know too much about that. What are we talking about there, and at what stage of the process is this?
Well, so for certification, Passivhaus certification, generally I recommend a two-stage approach. One would be an initial design stage review or pre-certification to review the designs to make sure that there aren't any issues that would jeopardize certification. And then the second stage would be once the building's completed, the remainder of the documentation would be submitted and reviewed along with any changes. The types of documents that are submitted are a full set of plans, so your floor plans, your elevations, section drawings, window schedule, the ventilation design, so what airflows are going to which rooms, your air tightness strategy, so how are you connecting the different components of the building together to ensure an integral air barrier, window performance figures, performance documentation from other equipment as well, such as mechanical ventilation with heat recovery systems, any of the heating systems, hot water systems, in non-residential buildings or even multi-story residential buildings. You'd have things, other auxiliary equipment like elevator equipment, maybe office equipment, things like that.
And is this more just to say, look, this is what I'm doing, or is this something that gets fed back on?
So I would review it, and then if there are issues with that, then I would let them know what those issues are and how to address them.
Yeah, these documents get seen.
Yeah,
and absorbed.
No, it's not some checkbox list, which I know other rating systems or standards have been criticized for. No, this is rigorous. This is part of the rigor and part of why people don't understand necessarily what they're getting into when they're going through certification. Because it is a thorough review of what's submitted.
quite often I have this question at the back of my mind: what are you getting for certification? Because you could come away with a very similar building just by saying, oh, I'm going to use some of what I've learnt here. Often it will end up being a worse building for that. But tell me, what are you getting for a certified passive house?
Insurance, really, that what you're moving into, you are actually truly getting a passive house that is going to function as it should.
And that's because of that feedback. That's because people are keeping an eye and checking through, and you're doing that test afterwards as well for the air tightness.
Oh, for sure. I mean, there's several years ago when I was working at the building research establishment, there was an investigation into the performance of mechanical ventilation with heat recovery systems, just to look at what is the standard industry practice for installing them, and it was atrocious. I mean, you had air really not getting into the rooms that you expected. You had ductwork that wasn't even connected to vents, so it was just blowing uselessly in the loft. These things, without somebody really reviewing them, they can easily be overlooked. And the building inspectors, they have a lot on their plate to look for, and some of these issues can be overlooked, and especially if they're not well trained or experienced with some of these systems.
I always think of Canada as being quite pioneering and very high quality buildings. What's your take on the Canadian building stock?
I must say I would have to disagree with that. I mean, if you look at some of over the last 15 years, it's actually quite amazing in Toronto how much the skyline has changed from the late 90s to today. Just the number of large buildings, skyscrapers essentially going up. And they are all glass. I mean, apparently the market wants this, so developers are responding. I don't know to what extent that's true, but these are the types of buildings being built, so full of glass, so really high energy demand, issues with comfort in the winter and in the summer, oversized heating and cooling systems, and there's not well designed or built, tremendous amount of thermal bridging because that's not even considered in the energy assessment. So you're getting buildings built that, especially if you're building, for instance, steel frame, and people are putting insulation between the steel studs, but effectively how they're building them, the insulation is almost useless because it's just being bypassed. I mean, it is more difficult on larger buildings to air pressure test them, but it is possible, and but they aren't tested for the air tightness, so no one actually knows how leaky they are. A whole host of issues, and there was an article written a couple of years ago about how these these buildings would be where your grandchildren buy crack from. Just they're going to be derelict buildings later on.
It's interesting. I've just got back from Sydney, and one of the big changes I noticed on this trip, my brother lives out there, so I've been there before, is just how much Sydney's gone up. It really has. They're building these skyscrapers everywhere, exactly like you say in Toronto. And it makes me think a couple of things. First of all, about the land beneath it, that there are a number of historic buildings that are dwarfed at the bottom, but it really makes those buildings almost not worth it because everyone else is building skyscrapers, so the land must cost so much, or must be so valuable underneath it. And then my other question, which I'm sure you're going to tell me yes, is this could be done differently though. If they really wanted these high buildings, which I imagine a lot of them probably end up empty, but they could be doing it better.
Yeah, certainly on your second question, yeah, I mean, and it's been evidenced. I mean, the first certified passive house high-rise office building was it was certified 2013, I believe. It was about 30 stories, I think, and it looks really nice. I mean, actually, it through just a double facade, they've actually made it look like it's a lot of glass on the outside, but behind that is a really high-performance building envelope. So they've demonstrated that it is technically feasible and also economically feasible. It came out, I think, about 4% above standard build costs. And this is the first time they've ever done that. So, that is possible. Now, it certainly would be a bit more of a challenge in other markets because, we don't have our product market isn't as mature as Germany. So whereas triple pane windows are common now, standard in Germany, in Canada, despite our colder weather, it's still not standard.
I think all this started by talking about the housing stock there. So I want to know a little bit about you in the work that you do. How are you bringing in the quality assurance procedure, and are you always going to Passive House standard?
No, I mean, I'd say right now for me, Passive House isn't my full-time occupation, just where the market is in Canada at the moment. But it's certainly a growing part. And I do consultancy for people who are interested in improving the design, but not necessarily going to the full extent of Passive House. For instance, I was approached last year from a builder north of Toronto, sort of in what we label as cottage country. So just people have not really second homes. I mean, some of them are second homes, but they're more like properties, maybe on a lake, a bit more rustic. And so they were building a new cottage for a couple in Toronto, and they just said, okay, well, we want to figure out how can we improve this, maybe what kind of windows we can use, how much insulation, how do we improve our air tightness. And so I just worked with them, and starting from a code level building, which would have been using a lot of energy, just through some simple basic measures, easily able to cut the energy in half. And it's not going to be a huge amount of work for them. So there's opportunities like that. And there is a growing interest in different cities across the country in building better buildings.
What is the main barrier then that's stopping the average homeowner from wanting to go that extra mile?
Well, homeowner, I guess part of it's a big part of it's just awareness. People aren't aware of what's possible. I mean, just this simple example of helping out on this cottage project. I mean, they were looking at, okay, what happens if we increase the wall insulation? And then I suggested, well, why don't we look at the windows as well? And so we found a suitable window, and they were just shocked at how much of a difference it made. So a huge aspect is education and awareness, and that's part of, I'm part of the Canadian Passive House Institute, and that's part of our mandate is really trying to educate the public, building professionals, builders, etc., about, there is a better way.
Just as we come towards the end, is there anything else that you wanted to mention about the quality assurance procedure?
Well, I highly encourage it, even if the goal isn't Passive House, and I apply at least elements of the quality assurance process on my other projects as well. And so it's really, it's a worthwhile endeavor, especially for inexperienced practitioners, if they're coming new to Passive House or high performance buildings. Having that third party check is very valuable.
Andrew, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ben.
With each episode, we provide show notes. There are online resource, and today, including key points, we've got some photos in there, links, and a transcript, all in reference to our chat with Andrew, houseplanninghelp.com/87. My call to action today is to take a look at a video. This is one that we've produced here at Regen Media for Canadian company Nudura. They're makers of insulated concrete forms. And we actually featured one of their award-winning projects, the Curly House, in episode 70. So go back into the archive to check that one out. But I thought you might be interested in this video because it features that project. It's a beautiful house as well. I remember chatting to the owners and they're saying, I can never understand why people build all these boring houses when they get this opportunity. Why not create something unusual and incredible? And that's exactly what they've done. So I'm going to embed that into the show notes, houseplanninghelp.com/87. That's the same place to go to as well if you want to work with us at Regen Media. We're a construction specialist, so particularly interested in anyone who's doing anything energy efficient, ecological building. We really want to help you and your business become more successful, and we can do that with content marketing. Don't worry if that scares you. I can explain what that's all about, but just creating great content. If you've got the budget to do that, then we want to hear from you. Next time, Jay Schaefer is my guest, and I can't believe that we've never talked about tiny houses on the podcast before. We'll be putting that right. Thanks for listening. Cheers.